I call the member for Buttram.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This budget is the latest in a long line of good Labor budgets that fails the Sunshine Coast. The latest in a long line of budgets built on a foundation of broken promises, deception and new taxes. This is a budget that fails to deliver rail for Biawata Maroochydore, a budget that fails to deliver more police for residents of Sippy Downs and Mountain Creek who live with the constant scourge of young criminals stealing their cars and breaking into their homes. This is a budget that fails to deliver for the motorists who sit in traffic every day on the Mooloolah River interchange. It's a budget that fails to deliver for the 40% of patients languishing on a ramp at the Sunshine Coast University Hospital because of chronic issues with the ER and ambulance ramping. Deputy Speaker, this is a budget that fails to deliver more teachers for schools like Mountain Creek State High School and Chancellor State College, who are bursting at the seams and barely keeping up. It's a budget that ignores the Sunshine Coast, and this budget is just the latest proof that Labor doesn't listen and that Labor doesn't care about the Sunshine Coast. It doesn't care about the 360,000 people who call the Sunshine Coast home, and they deserve better. Deputy Speaker, the Sunshine Coast is one of the fastest growing parts of Queensland. Places like Caloundra South and Palmview are growing at a phenomenal rate as new arrivals from places like Sydney and Melbourne flock to our amazing lifestyle and tight-knit sense of community. But critical infrastructure like roads and rail are not keeping up with this growth. There has been a complete failure to plan for the population growth we're experiencing. And sadly, Deputy Speaker, based on what we see in this budget, it appears that this state government has given up even trying. In years past, I've been complimentary of the Minister for Transport and Main Roads because he has, in the past, been willing to work with me for the betterment of my community. In years gone past, the Minister listened and he promised to deliver essential upgrades for critical bottlenecks such as the Mooloolaba Road-Sugar Road intersection. But not this year, Deputy Speaker. This year, funding for every major road project in my electorate has been cut in half. Projects have been put in the go slow or they have been cut. If we use the Sugar Road-Mooloolaba Road intersection as an example, this time last year, the Minister said in this 2022-23 year we'd get $6.3 million spent actually upgrading this dangerous and congested bottleneck. But after years of planning works were supposed to start this month, but what we've seen in this budget is a cut in half to $3.5 million. When will work start? Thousands of motorists are stuck in congestion at this heavily used intersection every single day. I've been fighting for this important upgrade since before I was elected in 2017. I was promised, as were the Sunshine Coast residents, that shovels would be in the ground on this project by now, but construction workers are nowhere to be seen and cars remain in a daily traffic jam. Just like the Sugar Road-Mooloolaba Road intersection, the Mooloolah River interchange has also had its funding cut in half this financial year. Minister Bailey has told local media that it's been delayed due to, and I quote, weather, COVID and flu outbreaks. That has to be the worst excuse I've heard since the dog ate my homework. How can the weather, COVID and flu impact a project that has not even started? While I'm on roads, Deputy Speaker, where is the Bruce Highway Connection Road at Palmview? More than 5,000 residents in one of the nation's fastest-growing areas are still waiting. The state government directed that this road would be built and opened by the end of this month. Well, that still hasn't happened, and it's clearly not going to happen. More than 5,000 of my constituents are still stuck using one road in and one road out. I was hopeful that the Roads Minister would intervene, that we'd see funding in this year's budget, but there is not a cent. It is simply not good enough, Deputy Speaker. I expect the Minister to ensure the Bruce Highway Connection Road gets built sooner rather than later. The only thing stopping it is bureaucratic incompetence from both the state government and from the Sunshine Coast Council. It is time for the Minister to do his job and to deliver the road that Palmview locals have been promised. It is just another example of how this Labor state government have forgotten about the Sunshine Coast. Excuse me. Deputy Speaker, no roads and no rail for the Sunshine Coast. It beggars belief that this Labor state government did not take up the 50-50 funding to build heavy rail from Biawata to Maroochydore. $1.6 billion was allocated by the LNP federal government, and it is being honoured by the newly elected Labor federal government. But did this Labor state government see fit to work collaboratively to deliver passenger rail from Biawata to Maroochydore? No. Who knows if we will ever see that money offered again. It is almost laughable that what this Transport Minister did commit to was another business case. Another business case. What a waste of taxpayers' money. It is nothing more than a pathetic attempt to stall. The case to build heavy rail on the Sunshine Coast is clear. It has been investigated and it has proven worthy, and it is a much-needed piece of infrastructure, especially ahead of the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. Every man and his dog can see the need except this state government. In fact, the Premier, when she was the Transport Minister, committed to have this built by 2020, and we are 2 years past that date. Deputy Speaker, I am proud to be a member of a party that will build heavy rail on the Sunshine Coast. Only an LNP state government will provide a better future for the Sunshine Coast with this region-shaping project. It's what I and my Sunshine Coast LNP colleagues have been fighting for. So in 2024, Sunshine Coast residents will have a choice: a future under this tired, corrupt state Labor government who ignore the Sunshine Coast, or a future where a Christopher Foley LNP state government listens and delivers game-changing projects like heavy passenger rail for all Sunshine Coast residents. Deputy Speaker, just like roads and rail, the provision of state government services are falling behind in the Buderim electorate and right across the Sunshine Coast as our population swells. Every week I speak to locals who are justifiably concerned about crime in the area, especially the rise of youth crime, which is rampant across the state. They are concerned about a lack of police presence and whether help will arrive when they call. I'm in regular contact with the officer in charge of Sippy Downs Police Station, and I know that he and his staff are working hard to prevent crime and to respond to incidents. But the simple fact is that our police can only do so much with the resources they have. We need more police on the front line, keeping families and their belongings safe. The community is sick and tired of cars being stolen and houses being broken into. Police are sick and tired of arresting the same young offenders. My constituents and all Queenslanders deserve to feel safe, and I call on the government to make the provision of more police on the Sunshine Coast a priority. Deputy Speaker, turning now to health. The Sunshine Coast holds the unwanted title as the worst performing health service for elective surgery wait times in all of Queensland. Almost half of all elective surgery patients at the Sunshine Coast University Hospital aren't being treated within the clinically recommended timeframe. The latest stats show that over 3,600 people are waiting for their surgery. Hundreds of patients, many in my electorate, are waiting in pain far longer than they should for the treatment that they deserve. The specialist outpatient waitlist, or the waitlist for the waitlist, isn't much better. Deputy Speaker, last week I met with a Palmview grandfather who is housebound due to his deteriorating eyesight. He has cataracts, and despite being a Category 2 patient, the Sunshine Coast Hospital and Health Service have told him he won't be getting a specialist appointment until August next year. He should get one within 90 days. He tells me he sits and he cries and he doesn't know how he'll go on. What has Queensland Health come to when a treatment administered for not-for-profit organisations like the Fred Hollows Foundation in third world countries can't be accessed in a timely manner at our state-of-the-art hospitals? Deputy Speaker, I feel for people like Daryl and the hundreds of others just like him on the Sunshine Coast. Whenever someone like Daryl asks for help, I fight my hardest to get them the treatment they deserve. But they should not have to come to their local member just to get the health care that they should have available to them. Every Queenslander should have access to health care without having to wait months or even years longer than they should. But despite the government's rhetoric in this budget, there is no significant funding to address the long wait list at the Sunshine Coast University Hospital, a facility which is only 5 years old and, as I said, is one of the worst performing in the state. Deputy Speaker, there is nothing in this budget to fix the ambulance ramping issue, which sits at 40%. Almost 1 in 2 patients who arrive in an ambulance at the Sunshine Coast University Hospital ED are left in the care of paramedics for more than 30 minutes. Frequently, patients wait for hours. It is not what our hard-working paramedics signed up for. They want to be back on the road helping the next person in need. This ramping crisis means that an ambulance might not arrive in time to help a Mountain Creek grandmother who's had a fall, or a Buderim boy having an asthma attack, or a Sippy Downs mum in labour. Queenslanders expect better from their health system. My LNP colleagues and I have been proposing real solutions for many months now. More beds, better triaging, the release of real-time data and putting doctors and nurses back in charge of hospital will go a long way to fixing the Queensland health crisis. Deputy Speaker, the last 2 years have been marked by considerable hardship for small and family business. In fact, this time last year, much of Queensland was just 7 days away from another COVID lockdown. At that time, industry stakeholders and the LNP had to fight to get the support for business and the government's failure to anticipate the needs of small and family business was all the evidence that Queenslanders need to know that this Labor state government either don't understand or don't care about small and family business. And, Deputy Speaker, with this budget, the state government show they still don't understand the needs of small and family business. Despite the assertions to the opposite in the budget papers and in the brief contribution from the Minister and her Labor colleagues, this budget sees a cut in the support for small and family business, with a paltry $1 million allocated to support small and family business next year. $1 million allocated to support small and family business and to support the Mentoring for Growth program in the next financial year. How is that a genuine commitment to small business? Deputy Speaker, on training and skills, this budget writes large the fact that this Labor state government are failing. By the government's own estimation, this budget shows they have failed to meet all but one measure of effectiveness. Once again, the state government have failed to reach their apprenticeship targets. Apprenticeship completions in 2021-2022 fell short by over 1,200. Over the last 7 years, this state government have fallen short by 14,400 apprenticeship completions. Imagine what another 14,000 apprentices would mean for Queensland at this time. With completed apprenticeships below target and with no modelling on the economic impact of having fewer qualified tradespersons, Queensland is experiencing a skilled and unskilled labour shortage, leaving the entire state with too many job vacancies. Deputy Speaker, in fact, for many of the industries that the state government like to trumpet, employment numbers are down. In manufacturing, in agriculture, in tourism, jobs are down. If I focus just on the Wide Bay, for example, the number of people employed as metal fitters and machinists are down from 2,207 in 2015 to 896 last month. That's a reduction of nearly 60% over the term of this government. And remember that Wide Bay is where this state government like to crow about building more trains, and presumably metal workers are an important part of that. Now, those opposite might think I'm being selective about the data here, but I'm not. Most regions have seen a reduction in the type of jobs that this government would say they want to create more of. Manufacturing jobs, agriculture jobs, education, tourism, all down. Perhaps more worrying is the fact that the policies of this state government are not producing the skilled workforce that employers need in order to grow. That's why we are seeing a reduction in jobs in many key areas. Deputy Speaker, employers simply can't get the workforce that they need, so they are required to either automate, move or reduce production just to remain sustainable. The state government like to crow about training commencements, but they're silent on training completions. That's the key part. The SDS is deliberately framed to focus on competency completions, not qualification completions. But the reality is that many jobs require a full qualification to be completed in order to make someone employable. And, Deputy Speaker, while it's great that the unemployment rate is low, I believe we're moving into a period when workforce availability is going to become more of an issue than it is for unemployment. In such an environment, Queensland businesses need more than ever government policy that is focused on delivering the skilled workers that they need. Pouring funding into a training system that doesn't align with the current and future needs of employment is about as useful as rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. That is why it's somewhat alarming that the government are only now committing to develop a Queensland workforce strategy. Only now in this budget have the government thought about a workforce strategy. But, Deputy Speaker, I guess it's a start, and I look forward to holding the government to account as they deliver it. Just before I finish, I'd also like to acknowledge the commitment in this budget for a number of schools and school projects in my electorate. We've got new schools at Palmview and the high school, upgrades to the special school at Palmview, the primary school at Palmview, but more particularly, I'd like to speak to the new halls at Chancellor and Mountain Creek, Chancellor and Buderim Mountain State School, both of which have been desperately needed. Some of the biggest schools in the state, Chancellor with 3,500 students. But I appreciate the government's commitment to get these halls built. But more particularly, I'd like to acknowledge the P&Cs, who are contributing a considerable amount of their own funding so that these halls can be built as well. Over $500,000 for both of those schools. So, on behalf of the community, I'd like to acknowledge the contribution, but also the contribution from the P&Cs. So, Deputy Speaker, I'll finish as I started. This is a budget built on a foundation of deception. There's an old saying, Deputy Speaker, that goes, "Tell a mistruth once and all your truths become questionable." How can Queenslanders ever trust anything that the slippery Treasurer says when 26 times he reassured them that there would be no new or increased taxes? Despite this, we see 3 new or increased taxes in this budget alone. Queenslanders deserve better, Deputy Speaker.
Speaker.